Hi. I am always intrigued by the crossroads where our thoughts and beliefs merge to form our perceptions, particularly when it comes to life imitating art, art imitating life. And what we're really seeing interesting aspects of this right now in society is with the rise of crime on television and crime fiction in writing and serial crime in real life. So fiction and nonfiction has really have really both zoomed in on the crime genre. And I have a great guest today. Walter B. Levis has written about crime, true crimes, for the New York Daily News, a variety of law journals, and he's written some really interesting books, articles, and everything else you can imagine. You just picture the kind of writing, he's probably done it. So we're going to be talking today about crime. Walter, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
Now, you spent a pretty illustrious career covering crime, while at the same time writing for periodicals and all different kinds of outlets. And then you also translated this into a book writing career.
Right.
First of all, what's the draw for you for crime?
Yeah, good question. The draw for me from crime, one way to tell the story would be that my first career was I was a tennis pro.
Oh, okay.
So I had aspirations to, be playing Wimbledon, and I never made that happen. But I then was what we call a teaching pro. Mm-hmm. I played a little bit on the circuit and won about this much money, and then had a career for about 10 years as a teaching pro in country clubs and private clubs in the Chicago area. Mm-hmm. So I was always fascinated by that environment because it has this kind of sanitized, everybody's, being nice and polite, but it underneath it, there's all sorts of conflict and crazy things brewing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I got into tennis. I mean, even to answer that even a little bit more deeply would be to say that I got into tennis as a teenager because I was really running from I got a little bit in with a crowd of people that were starting to do some crazy things. This was in Chicago, in the suburb of Evanston, and Evanston has some very wealthy pockets and has some other pockets, and it's a complicated place. And so I was, doing way too much drugs and crazy stuff, and my friends started kind of getting a little crazier. And then when it got to the point where I don't want to incriminate anyone, but it was many years ago, somebody, they stole a car and this and that.
Yeah.
That then it was like, this scared me.
Yeah.
And I needed something completely different. So it was like these guys, these were not, a couple of these guys actually did end up being in jail, but these were not gangsters.
Stupid punk kid stuff.
It was youthful, juvenile delinquency. But I got scared of all that. And also I was doing way too many drugs when I was, this is like, young, 11, 12, 13, 14, I got scared of all that. And this is the 1970s when tennis was becoming a big thing. They were building tennis clubs everywhere in the 1970s.
Oh, yeah. I worked in the health club industry in the mid-70s.
This is in this mid-70s is exactly when they thought tennis might become, like a team sport. And they started with
I remember.
So they built tennis clubs everywhere. So there was a tennis club that was built a couple miles from me in Chicago, Toohey and McCormick. And I don't know quite what gave me this inspiration to go up there and say, let me have a job here. I was washing the towels, and in place of getting money, I would get one free lesson a week, and I could use the courts whenever they were available.
Smart trade.
So I became like the tennis rat, and I did the towels, and I got one free lesson a week with a great guy named Rod Schroeder, still an important man to me. God rest his soul. I don't know where he even is these days. But that world of tennis, in many ways, I was kind of running from the darker world. And the tennis was my refuge. And then it gave me a whole other set of friends. I guess I couldn't handle the peer pressure. So it was all about the cleanliness of the tennis world, really. So then I'm, a 22-year-old guy trying to figure out what to do after I've graduated college. So I was a tennis pro basically until I was 30. And my novel, my first novel is based on that experience, and it's really the story
They
of...
say your first novel is usually autobiographical.
Right.
In some way.
That's right. And it was much more autobiographical. Yeah. It is the story of a tennis pro who gets caught between a woman that he really loves and a woman that everybody expects him to marry, who's not the one he really loves. And then there's like a third woman whose husband is a Jewish gangster. It's set at a fancy Jewish country club. It's fiction. I mean, many of these things didn't happen, but it's all based on my experiences during those days. So I realized I didn't want to be a tennis pro as a career. So, I'm trying to get to the answer to your question about the crime. And
This is good background. Gives good color.
So what happens
and
is...
you are a storyteller.
I appreciate that. Right. No, and I'm trying to just tell the story here of what happens then when I realize I don't want to be a tennis pro as a career. And I, at that point, was a head pro with a pro shop and, doing things. And
now you're writing this book.
I'm not really writing the book yet.
Okay.
But I'm already, the bug for writing is there, totally. I picked the bug up in college. I had, college classes that got me going on writing. I could actually even say more about where I think the bug for writing comes, but let's stick with this story because I want to get to the moment when I realized that I don't want to be a tennis pro. So I'm very, very lucky that in Chicago, Northwestern University, Medill School of Journalism is, and I was able to get
impressive.
I was able to get in there and do their 1 or 2 year of training, and it's like a boot camp.
Yeah, impressive.
And it's great, and also it's like its own little mafia because they have so many big time journalists that once you come out of there, it's like boom, boom, boom. You have a lot of contacts. But here's where things get back to the question of crime. When I was in journalism school, my professors all urged me to go into sports writing, in particular to write about the tennis business. And it just didn't work for me. I did talk to some people at Sports Illustrated because, Medill has connections everywhere. But I really wanted something vastly different. And my first newspaper job, I just, they gave me a shot at the crime beat, and I just took to it. I just was really, really drawn to it. And I have thought a little bit about what some of that appetite is. There was my teenage years of things, but there's another piece of this, which is my father. He did not work in law enforcement, but he worked very, very closely with law enforcement because my father managed a hotel on the south side of Chicago that had an arrangement with the Cook County Jail that when people were released from jail, they would take them to this hotel that my father...
To help them get a job.
To help them settle. They had a few days there, and there was, vouchers and things and, worked out. So my father was managing this hotel of guys who had just gotten out of prison, and it was a very, very rough place. It was called the Bennington Hotel. And my father carried a gun on his hip, he carried a gun on his ankle, and he carried a sawed-off shotgun back and forth between the car. And he dealt a lot with the criminal side of things there, and he worked very closely with the police when he was managing this hotel. So my father's life loomed here a little bit. He then left all this. He didn't do that. Actually, all that was before I was born, even. But that stories of my father in his work also kind of had always given me some sense of interest in this whole sort of world. So then I just took to it. I just took to this crime writing.
Do you remember what your first story was?
I do. Well, the first big story. You write some
your
things.
first big story.
Yeah, you write some things just off the blotter. Whether they don't even call it blotter. All of this is going back before there was the internet. So we got to place this. This is. I really started my first journalism job was 1988. So and it was up in Binghamton, New York, at the Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin. which back then anyway, Binghamton was known, quote, as a good city for crime. You know, there was a lot of drugs that came down from Canada.
Yeah.
There was a lot of activity. But my first big crime story with Binghamton involved overcrowded prisons. We were investigating that the Susquehanna County Jail had all sorts of violations on file, that they were putting like people pulled over for DUI in a cell with people who were there convicted on, violent felonies.
Oh, wow.
And that's like that you're supposed to keep those people separate. But it was all about this overcrowded prison stuff. And then it was a question of who's responsible. And, in the tradition of sort of old-fashioned muckraking journalism, we were finding the politicians who should have been doing what they were supposed to do and didn't. And so it turned into kind of an investigative piece of reporting. And then, of course, I spent time in the prison, and I'm talking to the guys and to the guards, and, it's all of that kind of thing. But it was very satisfying, meaningful. I appreciated the investigative side of it. I felt like we're on the right side of truth here. We're trying to tell the story as it really is. And so that was really kind of the big, my biggest thing. There was a series of articles on it up in Binghamton, and that was sort of my real breakthrough on this crime world stuff.
No, that's an interesting angle to approach crime. Did any of your writing focus on criminals or the system beyond this?
Yeah. Did any of my focus on criminals or the system beyond this? Well, certainly the current,
because that certainly is a system issue.
Yeah, that's system issue. The current book, The Meaning of the Murder. I'm trying to. My wife reminded me, don't forget to talk about your work. The current book, The Meaning of the Murder, focuses on a family that unwittingly gets caught up in the global war on terror. When what happens in the book is and
it's called The Meaning of the Murder.
Correct, right. The Meaning of the Murder, and the story involves the father of an Orthodox Jewish family who is a bank compliance officer. He discovers that his bank is violating the OFAC laws, which are and they're funding terrorism. His bank is funding terrorism. And he brings it to his bosses, and they basically ignore him, tell him what they call strip the payments. And after agonizing about his role as he works for the bank, and he's a fully assimilated member of his community, but he also feels, as a Jew partly, and as a man of integrity, that he should do something about it. So he turns whistleblower.
Oh, wow.
And he goes to the Department of Justice. And 2 days before he's supposed to give his deposition, he disappears. And he leaves behind a wife and 3 daughters. And the story is very much about how they respond to this whole situation. And eventually she meets the man who knows something about what happened to her father. And so when you say about the system versus the individual or the person, this book is very interior in that I'm interested in this experience of the meaning of an event. That the meaning is, this is probably why, looking at your work, I was so interested in this whole issue of perception, because the meaning of our experience depends on how we perceive it.
Yes.
And our perceptions depend on our awareness of what parts of this we're bringing into a situation, what parts are really, what is really outside of us and what is really inside of us. This interaction is very, very much what I'm fascinated by. And as a journalist, this is part of why I made this transition. As a journalist, I found it frustrating that I couldn't deal with the inner life as much as I want to.
Oh.
I can give you an example of this. I have another little story about this, okay? I'm in Chicago. I'm working at the time for the Chicago Lawyer magazine. Reputable place, great access, et cetera, et cetera. I'm interviewing Mayor Richard M. Daley. Richard M. Daley's father. And I'm there interviewing him about his approach to crime and what's going on. And his father was a famous machine politician, famous for patronage and doing favors and all like that. And the son as if to distance himself from his father's history, had hired this team of squeaky clean Ivy League type lawyers to be the city attorneys. So our angle involved this question of what's really interesting. What are you doing here with all these city attorneys who, they have nothing to do. Some of them
And how
weren't
come?
even. How come? And what's going on? They're not part of the city fabric. So it was a very interesting angle we had on this story. But here's what fascinated me the most. I'm having this interview with the mayor of Chicago. Throughout the entire interview, he's chewing gum. But he takes a couple bites of gum, spits it out, wraps it back up, takes a fresh stick. Over and over again, he is compulsively chewing gum. And it was such an odd mannerism.
Behavior.
It was such an odd mannerism. I was fascinated by it. I couldn't find any way to legitimately make it part of the article. And we generated a successful article for the magazine. But this little habit, this weird thing, I don't know to this day. Did he just have a bad taste in his mouth?
Did you ask him?
I didn't because,
Because he is the mayor. You're trying to make sure you get your story.
Yeah, and the only reason I had the story to begin with is because he's good friends with the city editor of the thing. I don't want to get in trouble with my boss. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to be a good soldier. My job is to get the article, and I did it. But I was fascinated by this detail that's the moment when I realized that there's this kind of stuff you can deal with in fiction and novels that is harder to deal with in the world of journalism. And that's like, so what did that mean to him? That's this sense of...
That's my favorite part of my day, when I get asked by a company or a leader of some company or event, and they say, can you just sit in the room and read it?
Oh.
And I sit, and those are the things I note. And then it's like, why is that person doing it? What is triggering that nervousness? Right. Because that's a nervous behavior on some level. That someone's feeling very stressed, and they're often not consciously aware of it. Just like the person who'll sit and bite their fingernails during the conversation, all the way, down to the skin. All those different behaviors. They fascinate me.
Well, this is to me,
and that you observe it, and then you figure out how to get it into a story.
Well, again, there's a couple things to say here that I want to try to bring out. One is, to me, this is probably what really interests me about your work, because of this question of how perception is really the fuel for stories. So that is just so fundamental to what it is for me to try and write fiction, where journalism is much more external. It's much more what's the system, who's responsible, these kinds of things. And in some ways, that shift from the outer to the inner is what marks, for me, the shift from being a crime reporter to writing crime fiction.
And I think you've really nailed it on the head, because what makes a really good crime fiction story is how you start to engage somehow and get into the heads of the characters. Are you, feeling nervous every time they show up on the page? Are you understanding why they're doing things? It's that whole psychological twist that makes a book really great. Or you just say, well, it's a good story, but it kind of missed on the characters.
Well, it's funny that you say this. It's a good story, but it missed on the characters, because I had trouble getting this novel published at the beginning of this process, precisely because a lot of crime fiction focuses on the procedural. There's a question of what happened and how do cops go about resolving solving the mystery. And I am interested in really sort of pushing the boundary of that, because to me, what's most interesting about crime fiction is the idea that in any crime, there's a certain moral ambiguity. The notion that I've sometimes put it this way, that, a crime, particularly a violent crime, is really like a rupture in the human soul. I mean, this is profoundly disturbing when we are violent. The victims that I've spoken to of violence, and I've also interviewed felons who have killed people, and what this... it's the aftermath of this that is as interesting to me as the event itself. And that's partly why the book is called The Meaning of the Murder, because it takes its title from a very famous book that let me digress for a second about that, because I took my title very consciously from, and there's an epitaph at the beginning of the book, from Viktor Frankl's book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
Well known,
Great book.
gazillion copies sold. Viktor Frankl, for listeners who aren't familiar with the name, he survived Auschwitz. He published this book first in German in 1946 after the camps went. I first read, and my novel takes an epithet out and includes that as the little beginning of the book. The popular takeaway from Frankl's book is often like, you can find meaning in the face of suffering. Okay, and that's no small, thing to say. But what interests me more is how, what I think partly is in this book, and I read it in college, then I read that book after 9/11, which profoundly affected me. And then I read it for a third time during COVID. What I take as the biggest message out of Frankl's book is that meaning is something deeply, deeply personal.
Oh, yeah.
And that it's deeply situational, it's deeply personal, and it's always moral. And that there's a line in which Frankl says, I may not be getting this quote perfect, but it's pretty close to what he says, is he says, we shouldn't ask what the meaning of life is. We should ask, what is life asking of us? That meaning is something we answer for. Meaning is something that comes out of our response to whatever it is we're facing. And it fits for my novel so well, because what happens to this family with the disappearance of their father, and it's a cold case. They never discover. And that's what fuels this. What happens to this family is these three daughters all respond to this in vastly different ways. One of the daughters really moves on and becomes sort of in denial of it. She's, leaves, has a different kind of life. The middle child, much to the surprise of the family that expect her to graduate from her Ivy League school and become a lawyer, that she joins the New York City Police Department and works her way up to a detective and is obsessed with finding out what happened to her father. She's the middle child. The youngest child is really been damaged by this. She's been in and out of institutions. She has drug problems. She's the one that the middle child feels has been most wounded by this trauma that they all faced, right? Same trauma, three different kinds of responses. What is happening here? But it's about this sort of a search for meaning.
Yes.
And that is partly what really fuels my fascination with the genre of crime fiction, is that there's a moral ambiguity, there's a sense of a moral reckoning in crime fiction that I find just very compelling, more compelling than some of the procedural stuff, which is interesting too, but this moral ambiguity is what I really...
Are you a believer that art imitates life or life imitates art? Because you've been on both sides of the crime writing side, the fiction and the nonfiction and also the fiction.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll be blunt.
And it doesn't have to be dual.
Well, but I'll be blunt.
I'm just curious.
I think a tremendous amount of crime fiction presents the life of cops in particular in a very one-dimensional, distorted kind of way. I think this is true in the cop shows, in the cop movies. A lot of the cops I know, and I'm an auxiliary police officer with the NYPD, and of course we're just volunteers and just help out with community things. They don't watch cop shows. They don't read cop fiction. They don't, and there's there's a distortion in my view and now of course there's exceptions. There's lots of exceptions. There's always
What do you think those distortions are?
Well, I think the distortions involve that police are not the distortion involves that police have a kind of hardness to them that that cops think the world is, cruel, phony, and corrupt. And they do think that, but they also have all the kind of vulnerabilities that all the rest of us have.
Yeah.
They still have the hopes. They still have the dreams. They still want things to be good for their daughters and their sons and their kids, So, they face this darkness all the time. And I think there's ways in which being a cop is even more complicated than being a soldier. And my novel is interested in exploring that because there's a character in the book who is the soldier who knows a lot about what has happened to the father. But what is interesting to me is that how do you keep that humanity while you're dealing with things that are actually so inhumane?
Right.
And I think that's missing from a lot of the presentation, where this cop is presented as sort of one-dimensional way.
Yes.
And therefore, the emphasis is not so much on how the cop has changed or learned or developed or grown or what's that inner experience like, but it's that the situation got resolved. They caught the bad guy. It's interesting how they caught the bad guy, and the cop is on to the next case, which makes for a good series, so to speak.
Right.
But it's not the sort of
And remarkable they get solved in an hour.
Yeah, and all of that, right? All of the distortions, and very often it's just not that satisfying to me. I mean, again, I don't want to. There's exceptions, and I don't want to sideswipe all of the successful crime writers out there. But but my book was difficult to place initially because it has this kind of hybrid crime family drama, and it has a overtly philosophical bent to it. That hopefully that's a feature, not a bug. Yeah.
Was it Viktor Frankl that urged you to get that philosophical bent into your books, or was it other things you've read, life experiences, people you interacted with?
That's an interesting question of what was Viktor Frankl that getting that philosophical bent. I think it's at one level. It's just. It's who I am.
Okay, I was going to say, do you think of yourself as philosophical?
Well, I'll tell you. Actually, this is a story that I don't know. We're here to tell stories, right?
Yes.
So here's a story of. I was asked in an interview, a blog interview, how I got started writing, and it got me thinking. So let me tell that story because I think it gets to this question of where did that philosophical bent come. Here's how I think to myself about how I initially started writing. I was 14 years old. And I mean, I don't know. You inspire candor here, Diane. I smoked so much dope one night that I thought I was going insane. I was with some friends of mine, and I was out walking, this was in Evanston, Illinois, and we were just out hanging around. It was a summer night, and, this is like 1973, 74. And I was just way, way, way high on just marijuana. Thank God it wasn't anything stronger. But one of the memorable moments of that is that I stood in front of this stop sign, and I stood there for like 40 minutes, thinking stop, and then trying to explain to these guys that don't you see this is about death. I was trying to explain to them this.
Well, it is if you run the stop sign, there's a good chance you're going to die. So,
Well, and then after, my friends were getting a little freaked out, and I was like, whoa, come on, let's keep walking. And I would explain to them, can you feel that underneath the street, there are all of these wires with the electricity? Do you feel the vibration of I felt like, I mean, it's funny in retrospect. It really is.
A high state of paranoia.
At the time, it scared the daylights out of me.
Yeah.
It really did. It overwhelmed me. I mean, these are just a couple of the memorable examples. But I kept, one friend of mine said, let's go down the lake and just walk. We got to walk this off, Yeah. And I kept, I was just feeling a sense of like everything in the universe is connected, and don't you get it? And so I was having a sort of, blast of a sort of philosophical, introspection, and it scared me because I didn't feel like I could contain it. What happened is when I got home that night, I was still quite agitated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, it really is funny in retrospect, but it really was scary at the time.
Oh, I bet.
Because I couldn't stop feeling these connections. Everything, a cup was not just a cup. It was a manifestation of the containment and what is contained. Everything was, constant. So it freaked me out. And I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I went and got one of those yellow legal pads, and I started to just write all of these thoughts. I just wrote them by hand. I just wrote them, and it was soothing. And it helped me feel like I'm not insane. I'm just having all these thoughts. And when I look back on it, I think about that. What I was discovering is I was discovering something about the power of language.
That is huge and such an important insight, because when I'm counseling people in a private session, or if I'm with a group of people, I'll often say, "Well, do you think you had the thought first or the feeling?" Because if you had the feeling first, it was probably a good gut instinct, and maybe there's something that shouldn't be ignored. But if you can actually identify that you had the thought first, like, well, I looked at him and, I thought he was going to be a nice guy. Did you feel that he was going to be a nice guy? Did you feel like instant warmth, or did you just look and say, wow, good looking, whatever it is, there's that breakdown between, and it could be debated for forever.
Sure.
And I could show books this high of the people who say, no, the thought comes first or the feeling comes first. And I'll argue both all day long because I'm a Pisces and that's what we do. We see both sides of all coins. And I don't believe in duality either. So I think it could be any merger of that. Yeah. But what you said is that essence of getting those thoughts out on paper, and then the feelings connected it, and all those tie-ins together. That's fascinating.
For me, I think that was the way in which writing was just came natural. And that it was just because it created like a positive feedback loop.
Yes,
because it was soothing. I didn't then become a teenage writer or anything, but I did have that journal, and I would turn to it occasionally, and it was just soothing, and it became this idea that words have a power to them, and then many years later, I really began to get into literature. In college, and even high school, we read some great books, and I had some wonderful teachers, and I began to see that. Language doesn't just be a good way to deal with when you're hyper philosophical, and language actually becomes a way to communicate with people. And I began to have a more mature understanding of it as well. But very, very formative moment.
If we were going to look at a bookshelf in your house, would it have more fiction or nonfiction on it?
Oh wow! Well, in these days, you have to include the Kindle, right?
Oh.
Because
or imaginary bookshelf.
I appreciate that. It's probably close. But I tell you my feeling about that, which is also important to me in terms of my own sense of writing, is that I think of the books that I'm reading as a sort of balanced diet. I'm someone who is always reading more than one book at a time.
Oh my gosh, I'm the same way.
Oh really? Yeah.
I have this one on this table, this one next to my bed, this one in my office near my desk.
Okay, so I mean, and the world could be divided between those of us who read more than one book at a time and those who are like, what? No, I'm reading this. After that, I'll read something else. So to me, it would be like you're going to just eat one food.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you, but what about if you're hungry for something else,
Do you read books in order?
No.
When you start a book?
No, I don't.
Do you read the table of contents if it has one?
I used to do that. I've become less tolerant, or so to speak. Partly, hey, the time's going by. We're burning daylight here. If this book isn't really going to be for me, fine, on to the next one, sort of a thing. I'm a little tougher like that.
Yeah, I understand that. If it's a nonfiction book,
Yeah.
I always go to the table of contents with so many people skip.
Right.
But I'll
right.
go to the table of contents and say, okay, these are the important things. To me, it reminds me of albums. You talked about a Kindle, but in an album, most albums had 2, maybe 3 good songs.
Yeah.
The rest was filler.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of books are.
Yeah.
They've got a point they want to make if it's a fiction book. In a nonfiction book, you have to keep the pages turning.
No, you mean the other way around.
I mean a fiction book,
right.
correct.
Yeah,
I do mean it the other way around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we don't correct ourselves in this podcast, so let's just correct.
I just want to make sure I was tracking that idea.
Yeah, the in those fiction books, which I personally can't imagine writing. I read fiction to relax. I read business books, to just try to learn and keep, constantly staying on the edge of what I want to do and, absorb more thoughts.
Right.
But when I look at a fiction book and I think of that crossover that you did to go from getting all those facts, getting the story, double checking it, to bringing in that full imagination of creating these characters, building a story. Yeah. Let me ask you about that. How do you do it? Because I don't know, and I'm envious of that skill.
No, I appreciate that. I think that is a question that a lot of people kind of wonder. My simple answer is that it's like playing Let's Pretend.
Okay.
A more complicated answer would be that, look, actors pretend they're somebody else. They inhabit another character, and
but they get a script.
Well,
somebody hands them a script, and then they have direction for how they're supposed to pretend to be that other character.
Right.
You're writing the script.
Well, no, that's right. But
creating the character that you could hand to that other person.
Well, I do appreciate that. That's where the writer is both the director and the actor, so to speak, at one level.
Yeah.
But the key point I want to make is that we all have that kind of capacity to imagine what it might be like to be somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that act of imagination, which I believe deeply in, I believe it's really the source of empathy. And
I think it's the source of empathy, and I think we all potentially have that.
Yeah.
But most people, correct. I won't say most people. Many people won't allow themselves the energy or the time or the commitment to explore another person's experience.
Right. That I couldn't agree with you more.
And that's in real life or fiction writing or any kind of writing.
And to me, that's partly what is so exhilarating about writing fiction is that it's the chance to explore what it might be like to be somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that is, to me,
that's cool.
Deeply held value of what fiction writing is all about. I don't get that idea really completely on my own either. I have been very influenced by Saul Bellow, a great Nobel Prize winning novelist, who wrote once that I'm going to not
we're going to
perfectly paraphrasing,
here.
But he wrote basically that to be a writer, one learns to live like one.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's talked about a sort of he had this interesting phrase of a stimulating equilibrium, that a writer is seeking a stimulating equilibrium. And then he also talks about that ultimately what matters at the end of the day when you're writing something is that writing involves this transforming action of the soul. That phrase I know I have exactly right. It's a Bellow phrase, the transforming action of the soul. Now, this is complicated, in many ways, but what I've always taken Bellow to
That's
mean,
what I want to know. What does that mean to you?
Right. I'll tell you, because I have a very distinct sense of what it means. First off, that you have to figure out how you're going to live as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that has involved many things. Earning a living as journalism is a great way to explore the world. And then when I got out of journalism, teaching was a way to support myself. But you have to find a way to both live and write.
Right.
And it also for me became you got to learn to write in short bursts. I used to write on the
Squeeze it in when you can.
Squeeze it in when you can. I wrote my whole first novel primarily on the bus, on the BXM2, going from Manhattan go from the Bronx to Manhattan. I used to joke I was the only guy hoping for traffic, because if things got jammed up on the Deegan, I could get a lot done. No, that's all really true. I mean, you write other times too, but so that was to me this.
But it's true. But that's writers.
Well, and
you find the time. If you want to find the time, when somebody says, I want to write a book, I say, if you want to write, you'll find the time. I don't have the time. Then you don't want to be a writer. Just own it.
No, there were days, especially when I was at my busiest, when I had when my daughter was very young and I had an elderly parent living across the hall from me. There are days, Diane, when I said to myself, if I wrote one sentence,
it's a win.
I wrote today.
Exactly.
I would say, okay, I wrote today. I advanced this little story or essay or whatever, one sentence, So that's the stimulating equilibrium part. Figure it out. How are you going to live and still write? The transforming action of the soul part is what I think Bello is getting at around some of the stuff we're talking about. That to write and to make a commitment to the writing process, that writing is a way of appreciating your perceptions, wondering about the perceptions of others, imagining into other people's lives, that this is, at least potentially, deeply humanizing. And I mean, I'm not the same person I was when I started writing The Meaning of the Murder. I mean, the conversations that I had, and I'm so grateful to all of the people who opened up to me and talked to me about their experience. And, I visited Navy SEAL graduation in Coronado, California. I talked to undercover cops in New York City, and everybody shall remain anonymous because I talked to people in the Department of Justice who work in counterterrorism. People were willing to talk with me about their experience because I'm not imagining it out of whole cloth, and also because I was interested in there being a certain level of multidimensionality. I didn't want this, this sort of the cartoon version of, a Navy SEAL is one thing. Well, they're not just one thing,
they're not.
So all of that kind of complexity, but it's a deeply, deeply humanizing, exhilarating experience. The challenge is to get yourself into a mental space where it's okay to just do all this and appreciate the process, without worrying every minute about everything else going on in the world. But so that for me, that's also when he talks about learning to live as a writer, or why writing on the bus was so useful, because I could let my mind go. I could say, okay, look, I got I'm going to my job. I'm taking care of my wife and daughter. I'm doing now for the next 35 minutes. Let's pretend I can work on this story. I can wonder what it's like to be somebody else, And, so to me, it's a very, very, meaningful, and, I feel very lucky to be able to do it,
Do you think writing made you more empathetic?
I think it has, but whether that comes across with my friends, they'd have to decide. You know what I mean? I feel like it certainly, let me put it this way, because I don't know how we judge ourselves too well on these things, but it certainly has underscored how much I value empathy. That I know I'm trying to write a story from another person's point of view, and I'm trying to see what is it like to be this person.
Did it change how you feel angry?
That's a really interesting one. Anger. That's a really, wow. They're like, uh-oh. Well, how did you know that I have anger management issues? I have struggled with anger. And I've also been happily married for 32 years. So my wife, she puts up with me. I do think empathy is really the antidote to anger.
I do too. That's why I asked you.
Yeah, no, I had a feeling, but it's like, wow, you really did put your finger on something, because I have struggled tremendously with anger.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no,
it was just a gut question.
Yeah, no, but it's really spot on, because and again, that's where the story for me, the fuel in storytelling involves this tension between the inner and the outer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just to try to come back to the book for a second, listen, a crime is something went wrong.
Yes.
And there's an outer reality to that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a righteous anger when something is wrong. I mean, anger is not just a bad thing. I mean,
it's not a bad thing. It's an emotion worthy of really good exploration.
Right? But there's another kind of anger that is destructive, that is inflated, that is that is lacking any empathy for what's going on. So it's such a complicated relationship, but it's crucial. And to me, that is exactly where the stories are at their most vibrant. The vitality is precisely in that drama between what can a person control and what can't they control. What went wrong and how does it make them feel?
Yes.
When is anger righteous and when is anger self-involved? Or these kinds of things. And it's all that ambiguity is why I really made a choice to not be a journalist and to try to be a novelist. And it's been that choice has not been easy. There have been days I've regretted it, that I've looked back and thought, I wonder if I should have done this. I mean, when I first came, just another story, right? We're here to tell stories.
Yeah.
When I first came to New York, I had an interview at the New York Times. To me, that's always been, the citadel of the New York Times, and at that time, John Darton was the city editor, and somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, and I, we got in and had this interview with him. And, he was saying, listen, you got the kind of background and this and that. And I actually said to him, well, I really appreciate meeting you. I'm really not interested in a career in journalism. And that moment has come back to haunt me sometimes because I've thought that I could have tried to do both, but I didn't. Instead, I really made this full-on commitment to writing fiction and plays and these personal essays. I really made a full-on commitment in the other direction, which I mean, listen, life has its way of taking its turns. But it's partly why this particular book is so satisfying to me. This book combines the elements of my life as a journalist and my life, my interest in fiction writing more than anything I've ever written, because it did involve so much old-fashioned journalism. I mean, understanding the OFAC laws, bank compliance, and it involved interviewing people who are experts. I mean, that's a lot of what journalists do.
Oh, yeah.
And it involved so much of this research, because the book is very much about the global war on terror and how it's fought and what goes on with it. And there was a tremendous amount of research that went into that. It's just old-fashioned journalism. And then was the marrying of that with this idea of that there's a family story and there's all these questions of meaning and its ambiguity. So that's partly why this particular book is very satisfying to have out there now.
We're getting tight on time, but how did you choose that? Where did that inspiration for that particular topic come to you from? How did you choose that book? Say, this is the book I'm going with.
I have an answer to that.
Okay.
Which is 9/11. I mean, this book is about the battle against terrorism at one level. That's partly what the book is about. And on 9/11, I was up in the Bronx. My daughter was, she was born in 1998, so she's like
2 years old,
2.5 years old, yeah. And I had a feeling that I'd never had before. We're up in the Bronx, but we could still smell it. The smell was unsettling. I was looking up, seeing those fighter jets going around, and I had a feeling I'd never had before that we're under attack. Maybe this puts me in that category of these naive Americans. And Diane, I tell you, I had a visceral, I could feel it coming into my body, and I had a memory of my father. That my father, I don't want to get inappropriately emotional here, my father volunteered to be a paratrooper in World War II because that's where not for the extra combat pay like most of the other guys, but because he wanted to be involved. And I was there with my daughter. I remember we had a little playground, and the sky was blue, as everybody remembers that day. And I remember knowing that I have no way to help,
Right.
that there are people who are going down there, the first responders, the people, and that I have no way to help. And I knew that I never want to be in that position again.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to somehow understand something about what the life is like for the people whose job it is to try to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I would say, is the inspiration for all of this, for this book. It took many years to kind of get there, but it's been a satisfying journey.
What a note to close on.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, everyone, I have been talking with Walter B. Levis, and he is the author of a new book. It is called The Meaning of the Murder. And we have talked about a lot of things in this episode, and wow, it was just great.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate what you do here. I really do.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
I'm Dian Griesel. This has been the Silver Disobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. We're recording here in Manhattan Center. We're in TV2. I love this place. Come visit us. Check it out. What's going on online here? Please hit subscribe. There will be links to Walter's book throughout all the copy below here, below this podcast. So please check it out. Order his book, read it, share it with your friends, and share this podcast and hit subscribe. Thanks. See you soon.